Okay, well, there you have it. That is the last interview of the five of why I left podiatry. And what I thought I'd do now is a bit of a summary on my takeaways from these five short interviews and some of the opinions that I had beforehand that have slightly changed, which I think is quite interesting. So, as I was listening to each of the recordings, I took some of my own notes. So I'm going to run through them and highlight some of the things that I think are really important from each of the people that spoke or each of my guests. And what I want to really point out too, I'm not saying that their opinion or what I'm about to say is correct and is gospel. Everybody will have their own opinion on what people say about why they've left the profession, and whether they're right or wrong isn't really important. I think what's important from all this is that we learn from it, that you might learn something, that there's a reason there why you should leave the profession. But what I want to do is keep podiatrists in the profession. I don't want anybody leaving. So I'm just going to run through. So the first guest that I had that we kept anonymous, and I asked him if podiatry was his first choice. Now, this surprised me that every person I had as a guest said that podiatry was their first choice. And why that surprised me is because I've had so many guests that have been on the podcast who have mentioned that podiatry wasn't their first choice. So I thought, oh, are people leaving because it wasn't their first choice? They were a little bit frustrated, and that's why they left. But to my surprise, podiatry was their first choice. The other part that was interesting about that is I then went back and asked a few of them what was their second choice. And some of their second choices, some were sort of still in healthcare and some were completely different. So I was trying to see if there was a correlation between that as well. Some people, even though on this podcast I had five short interviews, I also spoke to some other podiatrists outside of this who have left the profession who didn't want to come on the podcast. And I just want to point out some of those people, the reason they said they didn't want to come on is because one person in particular said they had such a bad experience with their employer that it would bring up so much anxiety they didn't want to talk about it, which I think is really, really sad. And it's not the first time I've heard that, where an employer has been overbearing, has been rude, has been abusive. So I just thought I'd just throw that in there. Now, back to the first guest. He said that he had good mentoring and he actually liked his employer. Now, out of the five, I think most of the people actually said the same thing, that they actually had good mentoring and they did like the people that were working with. But one thing that really stood out to me with the first guest was he was being forced to see about 20 patients a day with 20-minute appointments. And he did feel that there was a big mental drain, and the workload was really hard, going from a student who was probably only seeing a couple of patients in a session, if you were lucky, through to being thrown in the deep end with a massive workload. And also the variety of patients going from one thing to another, which I thought would be quite interesting for a new graduate, that you'd have all this variety. And I have heard people say that's what they love about podiatry. But it was interesting that he felt that so much variety all the time was actually creating more of a mental strain. So I think that was really important. He also went on to say that he then found a new employer, once again, was a good mentor, good employer, and he was allowed 30-minute appointments. So he was allowed a little bit more time, which was great. But he found that patients just unloading their problems on him all the time was quite draining. And I just think this is something that we really need to address with our new graduates coming out. We need to ease them into the workload of private practice. And I've mentioned before that I did a podcast called Understanding Biomechanics by Playing the Guitar. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go and find it and have a listen to that podcast. And I've sort of, in my head, I've updated. If I was doing that again, I would do it differently. So that's a talk for another day. But I just think it's really important for us to understand the new graduates, they haven't been seeing the amount of people that we are used to seeing. And in our heads, I know we're thinking we need them just to start working. We need them to be profitable, but there's a right way and a wrong way of actually doing this. So the other thing he went on to say that I thought was really important, there was a lot of unpaid overtime. So there was time he was spending after work doing adjustments, whether it was doing clinic notes. There was a lot of time he was traveling up to 50 minutes, I think it was, to different clinics. Now, I know when I had people working with me, their travel time to go to certain clinics was included in their work hours. So I can understand how you could look at that as going, this is a bit unfair. Well, I have to travel 50 minutes one way and 50 minutes back again, and I'm not getting paid for that. That's a big chunk. out of my day. So maybe that was something that wasn't negotiated or was not talked about when he first actually started working there. And then he felt that there was more money in public government sector than there was working as a podiatrist. Now, I think as an employee, I know this has been a question that's come up a lot lately, but how much should podiatrists get paid in first year, second year, and as they go through? And then after a number of years, how much should they get paid? And I'll tell you right now, as an employee, yes, there probably is a bit of a ceiling on how much money you can make. But as an employer, if you decide to have your own business, well, the sky is really the limit. It's up to you on how you build your business. So I know as a podiatrist and being a business owner, I made far more than I would ever make working for any government department. So, but I can understand in the first couple of years as an employee, you probably could make more money elsewhere. This takes me back to one other thing though. What I found was really interesting that you'll notice is all the people that said that they left podiatry for whatever reasons, none of them actually mentioned at the beginning, I left because the money was no good. They left for a multitude of other reasons. Then, yes, they were making more money in other areas, but none of them actually said, oh, I didn't like the money I was getting paid, so therefore I wanted to find another job that paid me more. There was all these other issues that were going on. So I think it is really, really important to remember it's not always about what you're paying people. There's so many more aspects to it. So if we move on to Dave Taylor, who is my second guest, and one thing I thought was really interesting that he said was that there was a lot to take in as a first-year graduate. And now he came over from the UK. So yeah, our systems might be a little bit different, but I sort of get the hang of that now, or I sort of understand what he means, that when a new graduate starts, it's not just learning how your clinic runs and then applying what they've learned at university in theory and then trying to use it in a practical instance in a clinic. But when you look at all the different item codes and all the different government departments that you may work with and the different types of materials that you may have in your clinic compared to what they were using at university, or a restriction of materials. I know at uni, sometimes we had access to so much stuff, but then in a private clinic, you don't always have the unlimited budget to just blow money on different materials. So I thought that was a really good point, that they're not only is it working with patients, getting used to working with patients, it's also taken on the other things that you need to learn, and also working with other team members if you haven't done that before. Now, David Taylor did mention he had a great admin team who really helped him out, which was great. What I thought was interesting with David when he made his comments, though, that he sort of enjoyed when he was working in private practice compared to working for a non-profit, he found that there was far less stress working for a non-profit organization because he didn't have to worry about could a patient afford it or not afford it. And there was no scrutiny from the boss about, are you doing the right things? So I think for some podiatrists who graduate, some people are better suited to non-profit or community health or government type employment in podiatry, and maybe private practice is not sort of the area that you should be working in. And he also mentioned that he felt his employers were really just slapping him about all the time about KPIs and statistics and his figures, and were really coming down on him quite hard. And from what I could figure out, he did work for a corporate podiatry clinic. Now, I think if you're a caring podiatrist and you really care 100% about your patients, I think you've got to look at your values and the values of the person that you're working for. And you've got to try and align yourself with a practice or a business owner that is more into that caring side of things. And I don't think, even though a corporate podiatry clinic may say that, oh no, we care about our patients, I also believe that they also care about shareholders and profits. So that is why they may be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to the KPIs. But I think there was a big problem between the employee, or maybe David, understanding KPIs. And I don't think it's all his fault, though. I think it's also the employer not explaining it properly. So the idea of KPIs in a business and being a business owner, I wanted to use KPIs not to tell someone that, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. I wanted to use it for training. I wanted to use it to help them get better, not make them feel bad about what they're actually doing. So I actually think sometimes the employee may not understand what KPIs are used for, how they're used, because the employer has not explained it properly. And I think some employers don't even understand the benefits of KPIs. They're not there to point out people's shortfalls. They're there to help with training and constantly improve their ability to work with patients. And sometimes if things aren't going really well between an employee and your patients, or they're not doing exactly what should be happening, sometimes you'll find it's just a communication breakdown. But it's sometimes trying to explain things to patients doesn't come naturally. And one other thing that he did mention too that I thought was really important, where he was talking about the clinic that he was working at, they micromanaged everything. That they they were scrutinizing every single thing that he did. So I just think if you're an employer, you need to communicate with your employees. You need to have a really good understanding of your expectations and their expectations. And for anyone who's talking to an employer, I think you should be interviewing your employer as much as they are interviewing you as an employee to become part of that team. And if I was an employee now and I was going to work somewhere, what I would be doing is going to the employer and asking them, out of curiosity, why did you get into podiatry? And find out what their answer is. Why did they get into podiatry? And I think as a business owner, sometimes we need to remember, why did we get into podiatry? Because you'll find a lot of people that are in podiatry or in healthcare are caring people, and they cared about patients and they cared about outcomes. But sometimes as the business is bigger, you can sometimes lose track of that. So as an employee, I think it's a really good question to ask your employer, why did you get into podiatry? And get them to talk about it and get them to open up and remind them why they got into podiatry. And I think if you can get them talking about that, you may find, okay, this is definitely the place I want to work. And if things are not going along the lines that they said, that what they told you, you can bring it back. So, excuse me, but when I started working, you told me that this is why you got into podiatry. And sometimes, like I said, business owners, we need to be reminded. So I think it's really important. Communication between employers, employees, just they really, I don't know, I can't stress that enough. One last thing that David said I think was really important was when he mentioned that he would be scrutinized by his employer, and David actually said, yeah, but sometimes the patient would tell me something about they had financial hardship and I wouldn't put it in the notes. The employee didn't understand. That's why I didn't explain orthotics to them. If that's happening to you as a new graduate, a new employee, or if you're a student listening to this, and just take note on this. If a patient tells you they can't afford something, write it in the notes, because therefore, if the employer does say, hey, why didn't you offer orthotics to this patient? At least you can say, the patient told me this, and it's in the notes. But I still think you should always offer the best treatment to every patient unless they decide, and unless they tell you, I'm sorry, but I cannot afford that. Then you come up with other options. But if you've offered it to them, write it in your notes, write down that the patient said no. So therefore, if the employer does come down on you and say, why didn't you do that? You can go, hey, refer to the notes. So the third guest that I had was Kerry Tull over in the USA. Once again, podiatry was her first choice, and she chose podiatry because she wanted a job that was more a 9 to 5, and there wasn't going to be a lot of after hours and call out, which I've often said about podiatry. Best thing, why I did podiatry, because no one ever dies and everything can wait till tomorrow. Now, I said that once before, and a few people going, oh yeah, but what about these people, high risk patients? And yes, there are things that can go wrong and there can be complications, but not with the patients that I'd see, because I didn't treat high-risk feet. I did different areas of podiatry. Now, going through what Kari was talking about, the one thing that I really took away from the conversation with her was how much and why she got into podiatry in the first place. She was, right from day dot, a caring person and wanted to actually help patients. And she mentioned that as time went on, initially she found podiatry very, very rewarding, but eventually she got really tired with having to dot every I, cross every T, insurers sort of guiding where podiatry was going. And all of a sudden you were doing twice the amount of work to make the same amount of income. Now, a lot of podiatrists, and you'll know that over the years, some podiatrists have shortened their time with each patient because of paperwork and because of all the bureaucracy and stuff you've got to go through and hoops you've got to jump through, that they're shortening the time to try and make the same amount of money. And that started to play on Kerry's mind a little bit, that, yeah, it used to be a noble profession to be in the healthcare industry. It was very noble, but now they were being overworked and things were just getting really, really complicated. So when she mentioned that she got out of podiatry, she also, actually, before I get into that, she also mentioned that, yeah, in business, you're almost forced to become, it's like a popularity contest. And we're actually all getting sucked in to that broken system. And when she said that to me, I went, oh my God, I think you're right. Because you could picture an area like I'm in Cairns, you might have 6, 8, 10 podiatrists. And it really is about who is the most popular podiatrist, who can market themselves the most and stand out the most. Now, I still think you need to back that up with really good treatment and really good patient care, but it has become a bit of a popularity contest. So she moved out of podiatry and got into health coaching, where she now feels that she is helping people and she feels it's more rewarding. So I reckon that was very similar to some of the things that other people said during the 5 short interviews on why they got into podiatry and what it was that they liked about it. So we move on to the 4th guest, which was on this particular episode, Chris Kenny. This was quite interesting that he had his own practice. He actually had his own practice. And what I thought was really important, what he said, is because he went to a private school, he felt there was pressure that he had to go to university. And I don't know if anyone's listening to this who you've got into podiatry because you felt pressured that you had to actually do something. But if I think back to my own time, it was when I was finishing high school, and I've mentioned this story on podcast before, that, yeah, my brother was doing dentistry. And I initially was going to be an art teacher. And the reason that I didn't end up doing that is my brother said to me, oh, well, yeah, why don't you do something in the health field? Therefore, yeah, you'll never be unemployed and you'll always make great money. And there's a bit more to that story, which is how I ended up in podiatry and not becoming an art teacher. So not that it was really expected that I had to go to university, but I did make a career shift based on what was sort of expected from my brother in one way or another. Now, Chris did mention that he worked for a little bit in the UK. And when he did work over there, he lost some of his biomechanical skills because he was working in NHS. He was working in areas where he wasn't getting to use everything that he was trained. Now, this is a super important point. If you're employing people right now and they've come out of university, they've been out 1 or 2 years and they're working for you, and all you have them doing is doing home visits, nursing homes, only general patients in your clinic, and you're not allowing them to use their broad range of skills that they were taught at university, you are harming them and you're harming the profession. That's my opinion. If you don't like it, I don't care, because I've spoken to other people about this, and this is something that when we graduate, we need to use all their skills. And the only way we're going to get better is by using all their skills. So he did mention that once coming back from the UK, then having his own practice, he felt the writing was on the wall because he was doing more routine foot care and not doing any biomechanical stuff. And he started to feel it was getting a little bit boring and a little bit repetitive. But he did have friends who had set up purely biomechanical clinics, and they were going really, really well. So, and he sort of mentioned that if he had his time over again, maybe he would have gone down that path a little bit more, and maybe it would have been more interesting. But just the boredom set in. And then once the boredom set in, he started to feel, he said, yeah, maybe I was feeling a little bit depressed as well. So he made a shift, a complete different shift out of podiatry. So my last guest was David Kidd. And it was the same thing. His first job was in a rural area. He moved backwards and forwards between private work and community work. And he did that a couple of times. He was in a very, very small area. But he just started to get a little bit sour with not just podiatry, but when he mentioned that there was that negative comment from a farmer, and he just felt that here he was an educated person. He's trying to help this person, but this farmer is actually taking advice from a supplier because he trusted him more. And that sort of sent him into a bit of a sideways move when he mentioned to his boss what was going on. They said, well, you do something about it. So he did. And what I think is really interesting about that comes back to what Kerry said, Kerry told about moving into an area of health coach management, because she feels like she was doing more. It was more rewarding helping those people in that way. And to me, I think David Kidd has done exactly the same thing. And what is really interesting, so he's transitioned out of podiatry, but his wife is still a podiatrist, and she set up her own business and she absolutely loves it. And what I like about that is just because he chose to to get out of the professional transition out of podiatry, his wife still does podiatry, which I think is fantastic. He didn't let his thoughts and opinions actually distract her in any way. And there was somebody who said, when most people get into healthcare to help people, and you want to feel that you're actually contributing in some way, it's not just about making money. And employers have got to find things with their employees that spin the wheels, float the boat, that actually get them excited. And this comes back to the communication, I think, right at the beginning, where employers need to talk to employees. What do you love most about podiatry? And ask them that on a regular basis. And also remember why they got into podiatry. And you've both got to be happy with what you're doing. And I really think values have got to align between the employer and the employee. In my 12-week podiatry business reboot, one of the first things I spoke about in week 1 was all about aligning your values, is making sure that your team has similar values to yourself. And that's the only way you're going to grow your business down the track. So just sort of a few other things just in summary. Like I said, no one left because they said the money was no good. I think that's really important. One thing they did say is there was a lack of job satisfaction and they didn't feel like they were making a difference in any way. They were doing the same thing day in, day out, and not really feeling like they were contributing or making a major difference. And they felt overworked, and they also felt undervalued, which I think is really important. It's one of those things, like I said earlier on, you've got to weigh up if you want to work for a bigger clinic. So I'm saying just like one big solo practice, but if you're looking at an employer who might have 2, 5, 10 clinics around the place, more than likely the business side of them is extremely important. And I used to have multiple clinics, so I understand that mentality. Then you've got the big corporates, which are bigger again. But you may find that you are better aligned with a podiatrist who's just a solo practitioner who's needing one other person to actually work with. Like I said, this comes back to your values. I think if you want to make a change in your current situation, before you even think about leaving the profession or jumping ship and just taking the other job because, there's more money and less hours, please talk to your employer and let them know how you're feeling. And the second thing, employers, like I said, you need to talk to your employees. Don't just assume that they're happy. They may not be. And if you are currently on a contract, I honestly believe never break your contract. If you've signed a 2-year deal and you absolutely hate it, you can't stand it, start putting out feelers, look for other jobs. I've got a group called the Podiatry Business Spartans, and I know all the podiatrists that are in that particular group all employ people, and they are all bloody really, really great podiatrists, have great businesses, and are great employers. And they really look after their team. So before you jump ship, before you get out of the profession, I'll tell you now, there are a lot of podiatrists out there who are looking for people to join their team who will really, really look after you. So I hope you've enjoyed these 2 episodes. I hope it's got everybody thinking a little bit. The feedback so far has been absolutely fantastic from everybody. It's probably, like I said, it's probably been the fastest downloaded podcast, and I hope this episode is as well. And I hope I didn't rave on or rant too much towards the end here, but I really want everybody to start just being nice to each other. As the boss, the employer, the head honcho, whatever it is you want to call yourself. Just start being nice. Really, it's one of those things where Nicole Friel said that her people that actually work with her are almost like her family, and you really, really need to look after your team that way. And if they don't feel like they're part of your team, I have had people that worked with me in the past that would come to work and they really didn't have anything to do with me or anybody else in the business. And they never really lasted very long. The people that really embraced what we were trying to do and wanted to get to know us, and we wanted to get to know them, we end up working together for years. So one last thing I just want to say before I finish up is I am planning on doing probably July, August. I will put something on the Podiatry Business Owners Club. By the way, if you're not in the Podiatry Business Owners Club on Facebook, come on over. All you got to do is answer 3 simple questions and you're in. If you don't answer the questions, then I won't let you in. I will send you a message to answer the questions. But I am going to do a 4-week live training called about how to attract and retain podiatry talent. So keep your ears out on that. I will be posting something shortly. And if you want to know a little bit more about it before I even post, please just send me an email, tf@tysonfranklin.com, and I'll send you a little bit more information and give you a bit of an idea of when I'm sort of proposing these dates, because I'm going to try and limit it to a certain amount of people so there's a little bit more interaction. It's going to be like a group coaching, and there's going to be some one-on-one, a lot of one-on-one sort of feedback. So, like I said, I hope you enjoyed these 2 episodes. Let me know what you think. And that's pretty much for me. So I want you to look after yourself, look after your family, look after your team, look after every single person that's in your life. And I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now.